Extreme weather events are occurring with increasing frequency. We all know that. Storms, floods, heat waves, deadly fires in places like California or in the southern Mediterranean. And it's in this context that the role of the meteorologist to sound the alarm, to help prepare people for these events has become sometimes a matter of life and death. But beyond extreme weather reporting, meteorologists have an important role as educators on climate action. They're some of our most trusted experts, the likes of which we really need when it comes to building awareness and understanding of the climate emergency. So it's a massive privilege to be in conversation with one of those trusted experts, a great friend of mine, Bernadette Placky. Now, she is an award-winning meteorologist. She's director of Climate Central's Climate Matters. This is a program that offers data analysis, graphics, and other reporting resources to a growing network of more than 3,000 local TV meteorologists and journalists to help them tell climate stories. She develops partnerships with media organizations, with non-profits, with academic institutions, and she serves as an expert on the evidential link between our changing climate and extreme weather events. Now, before Climate Central, she worked for a decade as an on-air meteorologist in Arkansas, in Kentucky, in Maryland, and her ability to understand all the complexity of the world, but then to cut through with storytelling is really remarkable. Bernadette, thank you for being here. Just let's start at the beginning. What was your journey from on-air meteorologist to climate emergency educator?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, and thanks to all of you for being here for this really important subject. My journey, it's interesting, when I was in it, I don't think it was as obvious, but reflecting back on this question, when you're a meteorologist, you do love the weather. You get really into storms, but you quickly see what that's going to do. You see how it impacts lives and livelihoods. And so you have this drive really to keep people safe and prepared. It's a big part of being a meteorologist. And when I was in that, you see the bigger changes on bigger scales and bigger storms and the compounding effect of that. So that was really part of my progression getting into climate change, is still that drive to keep people safe and prepared.
And tell me, what have you seen then over your career? Just describe the kind of weather patterns that you were first reporting on as a meteorologist and then what we see today. Just give us that kind of span, if you like.
So our heat waves are getting more intense and they're lasting longer, and our water cycle is being supercharged. It's evaporating more water into the atmosphere when it gets hotter, so the drier areas are drying out even more, and then you've got more moisture, so when it does come down in the form of a storm, there's more rain to come down. On top of that, with our sea levels rising, we're seeing simple sunny day coastal flooding creeping up and up and up more. And then when it's combined with a landfalling tropical system, which are intensifying more rapidly, they're coming with a higher, more deadly storm surge and more rain.
What you've done, if I could say, Bernadette, in that answer is so brilliant, because you've just described something incredibly complicated in literally kind of 45 seconds. And what you've also done so brilliantly that meteorologists do is use your hands as well. I mean, I don't know if there's is there a special...
You can't keep them down.
Is there a school you go to that, I mean, it's really
the
amazing.
Wall, you need the walls.
So talk to me a bit about public opinion. How has public opinion moved in respect to the climate crisis?
Public opinion has really shifted. And first of all, we'll talk US here.
Yeah, please.
Because global is a very different conversation. But in the US, it has moved dramatically, I'd say, over the past 5 to 10 years compared to where it was even. However, there's a huge misperception on where people are on this subject.
Right.
We learned a little bit more about this with another speaker who's going to be here, Tony Leiserowitz, and he really broke down the American public into 6 categories through all of his research. And the dismissive group is the one that you're not going to reach. It's less than 10% of the population, but they're so loud that they have an outsized voice in the conversation, and it quiets a lot of general conversation on climate change. So people are afraid to go there with the subject because they think it's more divided than it actually is.
And are they still, that group is the hardest group to reach still?
That is a group you're probably not getting to.
Right.
But it's less than 10% of the population. So if you focus on that, you're missing 90-some% of the population who has a lot of questions. They know something's happening, but they don't know what exactly and what they can do about it.
So what are the principles that you would use then to communicate to lay people, if you like, people who are not steeped in the science, they are not looking at the data in the way that you are, what kind of communications techniques and principles do you use to get the story across?
The first thing is know your audience. This is the golden rule of communication, and it's going to come up a lot, but there's a lot banked in there. It's topic, it's tone, it's timing, it's how you really resonate with someone. For example, a scientific conversation is going to be very different than a conversation I have with my grandmother. Second, you want to meet people where they are. There are so many things that actually connect us. We focus on the things that divide us, but there are things that really bring us together. And in those shared values, there's a commonality because sadly, climate change is affecting almost everything at this point. So you can start on those shared values and understand from there. The other thing I always say, third, is personalize and localize. I mean, it's a global issue, but people don't connect necessarily with a polar bear or a global average temperature. They know it was 90 degrees outside here today in Miami, and that's hot. So really bring that down on the local personal level. The fourth thing is simplify. I mean, we have some amazing people here at this event who know a lot, but the rest of the world doesn't necessarily follow this the way we do, so break it down. And then the last I'd say is do not be afraid. And I can't stress that enough because there's some really complex subjects that have happened in this world that we don't run away from, but people run away from this one. Science is on your side, public opinion's on your side, engage.
And that's a really interesting point about public opinion because it has changed, right, over the last decade. I mean, you've made the point that those who deny that the planet is warming has got a smaller and smaller and smaller group, but it's also become quite political as well. Do you see that as a challenge in terms of communicating that you are trying to kind of work through what can be quite a politically challenging topic?
It's a challenging part of it, absolutely,
Yeah.
and I mean, you can't ignore it. However, it doesn't have to be the full conversation.
Yeah.
There's so many other ways. I mean, we started with talking about weather. You can talk about how it's affecting health, how it's affecting your kids' camp. I mean, they're changing camp times and hours. Sports are being affected by this. Where you travel, what time of year you travel there. I mean, the simple things, but then the big things too. Our food systems, our water availability, all of that's being affected. And I know policy is connected. I'm not ignoring that, but there's more to this conversation.
So talk to me a little bit about how you strike the right balance. I mean, we were at a session this afternoon, the media session, and we were looking at some data that demonstrated that there's high levels of anxiety around the climate. I think in the US, there's 64% of people would say they're either moderately afraid or are quite afraid or quite worried, I think was the adjective. And we've talked about tipping points. We were talking this afternoon about the Thwaites Glacier, that if it, or glacier as you would say in Europe, if it melts, the sea is going to rise by 11 meters?
11 feet.
Something, or 11 feet, right? I mean, devastating. How do you strike the right balance? Because we don't want to catastrophize, which then makes people feel like they have no agency, they can't do anything, but equally, we need to be realistic with people. So talk to me a bit about striking the right balance when it comes to climate communications.
And you're right, it's both.
Yeah.
Because there is going to be a lot of amazing conversation here about opportunities and solutions, and that is just as important part of the conversation. But we also can't ignore the seriousness. So I think it's okay to go there with the seriousness, but you can still bring it through to the build people's capacity to respond. What are the ways out of this? What are the responses? What are the solutions? And we're going to have a couple of days full of those here. So there's a lot of examples of that.
And people are looking for solutions, aren't they? People want agency in this fight.
People are concerned. They really are, and they want to be able to do something. They just don't always know what to do. There's, as much as we know about the actual science, there still is this enormous gap in our climate IQ with people who aren't dedicated to this subject all the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes we lose people in that disconnect because those of us in our climate circles get really excited and go, go, go with our lingo and our terminology, and some people aren't following along. So there's still an ability to bring people along in that process to help them understand what can be done.
But presumably also don't dumb the storytelling down that it becomes meaningless, right?
No, and actually, I do not like dumbing it down, that phrase, because it takes a lot of skill to simplify.
Listen, as a former television journalist myself, I know it's
keep that robustness of the science.
It's one of the hardest skills, right?
Yes.
So look, I think we've got quite a lot of folk in from the private sector over the next few days in the room participating and speaking. What role do companies have as sources of trustworthy climate communications? What role for business?
You know, an enormous role. And this is where it's going to take all of us to really move forward. We have policy, we have communicators, and we have businesses. And businesses are implementing, and they have such a brand that they carry to the public. So there's really sort of two sides to it, that businesses are becoming more sustainable in their own operations, and we know a lot of people are going to be talking about that and doing some amazing work. But at the same time, I don't want people to forget that they have a megaphone to the public too. And to figure out creative ways to bring those simple climate facts that you think people know, but bring them out to the public so that people can build that agency, know what the solutions are, know a path forward.
And we know also that the relationship between the employer and the employee is one of the most trusted relationships, and information that companies impart to their own employees is trusted at a higher degree than some mass media. So there is a real role, actually, for businesses to communicate on this topic, right?
There absolutely is.
So maybe it's a bit of a personal question, but you are one of the most optimistic people I know. But what you see in the data and what you've seen over the span of your career is pretty grim, pretty frightening. How do you remain optimistic?
Well, I think, one, we should define the word optimism nowadays. It can unpack a lot there. Well, it's not an easy thing. I think it depends on the season, the month, how I would answer this question. But one of the ways I really look at it is we have to be. Yeah. Because this is one of those complex issues that it's not just right now, but it's also looking forward. Mm-hmm. And there was a time we were on a path to 5 or 6 degrees Celsius of warming, right?
Yep.
We've brought that curve down. Not enough, though. And that's the thing. So it's a process, and we're in that process right now. And what I think that's really hard to communicate, because it's several things going on at once, and people just want one simple answer, is that our solutions are happening. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a lot of really cool stuff happening. Our warming's happening faster. And we need to switch that path.
And you can see when you focus minds that you can make real difference. Look at Europe. Right, the war in Ukraine, the terrible invasion of Ukraine, has forced European countries to completely rethink the energy mix. Germany has gone from 90% oil and gas coming from Russia to, I think, less than 10%. They brought 6 LNG terminals on in a year and filled up their gas storage. So we can do this. We can turn this around. We can flatten the temperature curve.
Bend the curve, right?
Bend the curve, right?
We need to bend the curve. And we saw this with COVID.
Yeah.
If we want to do something, we can. And this is a subject matter that we know the causes. We know the path forward. We need to accelerate and supersize those solutions. That's really been my theme of the year, is accelerate and supersize. We have to do more, and we have to do it faster.
So last question, because we're in the final minute of this speed conversation. The role of meteorologists is going to become more important as we move through this period of really driving mitigation against the climate crisis?
Well, I think meteorologists are super important, so yes. And the interesting thing is it's not just the impacts, but weather is one of our solutions. Wind and solar. This is weather forecasting. So yes, it's going to play a part going forward.
So last question, visuals are really important, right? They're important when you tell stories, whether you're a journalist, whether you're a meteorologist, if you're in the storytelling business. Tell me about the visual that you're wearing and why it's important.
Okay, so I'm very excited. Some of you probably know this, but those who don't, these are the Ed Hawkins warming stripes, and every line is a global temperature anomaly. So you start on this side. This is going back to 1850, and you see how the world has warmed in that time. So if you go on showyourstripes.info or hashtag show your stripes. Ed Hawkins done a lot of really cool stuff with these stripes designs.
Bernadette, you are absolute inspiration to me, and I hope you're an inspiration to the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you.